Color grading in Premiere Pro should not take as long as it does. The reason most people spend hours on color grading isn't because color grading is hard, it's because they don't have a system that works on every clip, every time. So today I'm going to show you the exact Lumetri color workflow that I use to color grade my footage fast and actually get the results that I'm after. By the end of this video, you'll have a process that you can use every single time you sit down to edit. So let's dive in. So here we are inside of Premiere Pro, and this is the clip we are going to be color grading. If we have a look at it, it's just this guy in Vietnam sitting on his scooter in the early morning. Now, before we get into color grading, I need to ask myself, what do I want this clip to actually look like when I'm done? And there are three main things I want to achieve. The first one is I want to make sure that our subject feels isolated from the background. The next one is I want to make sure that I have complementary colors in this shot. And the last one is I want to make sure that not only our subject is separated from the background, but he also stands out. I want to make sure that we try and kill off as many distractions behind him as possible. Cool. So with those three things in mind, we're going to make every single adjustment to this clip with them in mind, and that is going to help us guide our color grade forward way easier. I'd strongly recommend just taking about 30 seconds to a minute and really thinking to yourself, okay, what's working in this clip? What's not? What do I need to fix? What do I need to enhance? And then what is the direction with this color grade? Cool. With that out of the way, let's now break our color grading process down into 3 steps. The first step is going to be all about correcting our shot, because this was shot in S-Log3, which means it's super flat. It doesn't really have much color or contrast or depth to it whatsoever. So we first need to correct our shot. The next thing we want to do is stylize and color our shot. This is where we're going to be able to put our look onto the shot and make things look really sort of our style, which is great. And then last but not least, we are going to be masking our shot. Keep in mind, you can do every single one of these steps, aside from masking, with LUTs, but in today's video, I'm going to show you exactly how to do everything manually. However, if you do want to speed up your color grading workflow like crazy, get all the looks that I use on my clips, and overall just make the color grading experience a little bit easier and nicer, then you can head down to the first link in the description and pick up my cinematic LUTs. But like I mentioned, today we're not going to be using them. So let's now get into our color grade. So the first thing we want to do is make sure that we have Lumetri color open here on the right hand side. And then also we want to make sure that we have Lumetri scopes open. For now, I actually don't want the vector scope, so we are going to open up the waveform and then we are going to close the vector scope. We'll come back to the vector scope in just a minute. And then I'm also just going to make our waveform a little bit smaller, and I'm going to make our clip here a little bit bigger just so we have a better idea of exactly what's going on in our shot. So to start by correcting our shot manually with no LUTs, we need to first add a whole load of contrast and color back in. So the first thing we are going to do is come down to the shadows slider. And while we're doing this, we want to keep an eye on our waveform on the left to make sure that we're not dropping things too far. I like to try and keep myself at a minimum of 10. So as soon as I start seeing some information sort of hit 10 or just under 10, I know that I've probably pushed the dark parts of my image enough. So what we're going to do is just grab our shadow slider and start dragging this all the way down to, like I said, about that 10 mark there, which is at about -90, which sometimes you might need to push your shadow slider that far. And then we're going to do the same thing with the highlights and sort of cap things off at 90 as well. So we're just going to come here, increase the highlights just a touch. That's looking pretty good to me. And then what we're going to do is also increase our contrast as well to sort of spread out our waveform. So now if we have a look over there, we've got things capped off at 90 and we've sort of got things capped off at 10 as well, which means we've breathed a whole load of contrast into our shot. And now if we just have a quick look at a before and after, which we can enable by pressing this little FX button, you can see this is where we started. And this is now where we are at. Overall, I would say this image is probably on the brighter side. So what we might do is just drop the exposure a little bit, just a touch, just like that. So that's looking pretty good to me. And then when it comes to color, all we're going to do here is probably add saturation of about 115. And I would say overall, our image is more or less corrected. The only thing I want to adjust now is our white balance. Just having a look at this shot, I would say I probably shot with a bit of a cooler white balance. So to adjust that, what we're going to do is just increase our temperature ever so slightly, just a touch there. And then when it comes to tint, I think we're going to push it over to purple just a touch. Cool. I'd say that's looking pretty good. A quick before and after. We've already made a massive change to this shot, but of course we are far from done. But that more or less wraps up our correction stage. That's step 1 done and dusted. Let's now move on to step number 2, which is all to do with coloring our shot. So what we want to do is close up our basic correction panel, skip over creative and dive straight into curves. If we were using LUTs to get our look and style on our shot, inside the creative tab here is where we would apply it right here. Look, hit the drop down menu, either go and find your LUTs or find them in Finder or Windows File Explorer. But like I mentioned, today we're going to be closing creative and diving straight into curves. Now we're going to kick things off with the RGB curve, which isn't going to adjust color whatsoever. We're actually still going to be controlling contrast and exposure in that curve. We're going to skip over the red, green, and blue curves purely because I don't particularly like that coloring workflow. And we're going to be able to push and pull different colors into different parts of our image a little later on inside of the color grading tool. So we're going to leave that for then. And then we can dive into our color curves in just a minute. So the first thing we want to do is place 3 new dots on this curve, giving us a total of 5 dots. We've got one down here in the bottom left-hand corner controlling the blacks. The next intersection, you can kind of see a grid behind the curve. The next intersection is the shadows. We've then got midtones, highlights, and whites. And what we're going to do here is just add a very simple S-curve to this clip. And what that is going to do is it is just going to add a nice amount of contrast to our shot. We probably don't want to play around with the brighter areas as much, purely because we already have quite a bright dominated shot. But overall, just like that, I would say things are looking pretty good. We can see a little before and after of just the curves by enabling or disabling this right here. So if I disable that and then enable it again, you can see that we've sort of given this image a little bit more contrast and once again, a little bit more life. So we're going to leave that there for now. We may revisit it once we've finished our coloring workflow, but now we can dive into our coloring workflow. So hue versus saturation is where we get to control the intensity of each color. Hue versus hue is where we can get to control the value of each color. So if we wanted to make the orange on this pole red or blue or green, we could do that in the hue versus hue. And then hue versus luma is where we get to control the luminance of each color, which is how bright or how dark each color is as well. And then we've got these 2 curves down here, which is luma versus saturation, which allows us to control the saturation levels based on the brightness of each area in our shot. And then we've also got saturation versus saturation is where we get to control the saturation of different levels of saturation in our shot as well. These 2 curves are a little bit more complicated, so we will probably just dabble in those a little bit. Let's first kick things off with hue versus saturation. The first thing I want to do is increase our subject's skin tone to help him stand out from the shot a little more. So what I'm going to do, instead of trying to guess exactly where his skin tone sits on this line, I'm going to pick up the dropper right here and make my way over to the subject, click on his skin just like that. And now Premiere Pro gives us the exact location of that color, which is great. And then all I'm going to do is pick up the middle point and increase the saturation of it. Now, what I've found from time to time is Premiere Pro does not give you a wide enough reach. So what we're going to do there is just add 2 more points on either side and then hold down Command on Mac, Control on Windows, and then that allows us to delete the points. And as you can see there, we've now got a bit of a broader selection. So we might just increase the saturation of that a little bit more just to help his skin tone stand out. And then what we can do is come over to the yellows and greens, just because we've got quite a lot of green and yellow behind our subject. And we can now look at reducing the saturation of that, just like that. I like to try and keep the diagonal lines as straight as possible for some reason. I feel like that's just housekeeping. And then when it comes to blue, let's try and increase the saturation only of his shirt, but not of this umbrella behind him to once again help him stand out. So let's select his shirt there, increase the saturation of his shirt, and then let's select the umbrella right there, which has given us sort of a bit of an overlapping space. So if we delete that point and then we sort of look at dragging this saturation point down there, I would say that is looking pretty good. Now, this hasn't been a super big coloring workflow. Sometimes you can spend hours, not hours, but you can spend like 10-15 minutes on the hue versus saturation curve, or you might spend a minute or two. It depends on the shot, and it depends how much coloring work each shot needs. Because we corrected our white balance before, we've got quite accurate colors in our shot, we don't need to spend all that much time here. Now, moving on to hue versus hue. This is where we get to change the value of each color. I actually really like the overall look and feel of most of the colors. The only thing I want to change is the green in that tree. Let's add a little bit more of a selection here. And then what we can do is push this up to become a little warmer or drag it down to be a bit colder. We're going to make this a little bit warmer to help it blend in with the scene and once again, attract less attention away from our subject. Now moving on to hue versus luma, we are first going to select our subject's skin tone and make it just a little bit darker. I probably shot a little bit overexposed here, so just dropping the luminance of his skin ever so slightly is going to help him just look a little bit more natural and true to life. And then once again, we're probably going to do the same thing with the tree. But once again, we're going to just increase the selection there, and we can come here and drop the luminance of it, just to sort of help it once again blend in with the background. Cool, I would say that's hue versus luma done. And then when it comes to luma versus saturation and saturation versus saturation, what we are gonna do is we are going to add a point right here, which is towards the brighter areas of our shot. And then we're gonna drag a point all the way to the end and just drop the saturation a little bit. What this is gonna do is remove all the areas in our shot that are super bright. It's going to remove the saturation from those areas just a little bit. If I wanted to completely kill it off, I'd drop it all the way down to the bottom. Or if I wanted to increase the saturation of all the bright areas in our shot, I'd increase it. So as you can see, we're not really making that much of a change here. It's more to do with the top right-hand corner of this building right here. So as you can see, as I drop that, the orangey sort of hues go away, and as I increase it, they come back. So we're just gonna drop this subtly. This is more of a housekeeping thing I do from time to time, just to make sure my colors are staying as accurate and true to life as possible. And then when it comes to saturation versus saturation, we don't really have any colors that aren't standing out or are standing out like crazy that we don't want to. So I'm gonna leave this curve just like that for now. Let's close up the curves tab and then open up our color wheels and match, of course, still inside of our coloring workflow. And now here is where we get to push and pull different colors into different parts of our image. Now this is going to be mainly all to do with contrasting colors. Contrasting colors are any colors that are adjacent to each other or opposite to each other on the color wheel. For example, the classic one is orange up here and teal down here. We see this everywhere inside of pretty much every single video. And the reason we see it in every video is because we find it so often naturally in our world. So a way we could do this would be by pushing blues into the shadows and then warm tones into the highlights, and that would start to create that orange and teal look. And of course, we could sort of, decide how much of that look we want on our shot. But for this shot here, we already have quite a heavy orange and teal look, so we're going to take a bit of a different approach. What we're going to do is make our way to the shadows slider, or the shadows wheel, I should actually say, and then we're just going to cool things down a little bit, and we're pretty much going to be done there. I actually don't want to adjust too much of the colors in this shot, purely because I actually really like the colors in this shot. So we're going to close up the color wheels and match tool right there and be done with it. Once again, this is a tool you can either spend 30 seconds in or 10-15 minutes in. And today, we're only spending 30 seconds in it. Each clip will almost always have a different workflow, but today, we're getting pretty lucky. So let's now move on to HSL secondary. This is where we get to select a color and then just manipulate what that color is and how it looks in our shot. So we now get to look at this image and think to ourselves, okay, let's think about either selecting a color and then enhancing it or helping it stand out, or the opposite, which would be selecting a color and then help kill it off to make it less, I guess, intense or noticeable. So I think we're going to go the second route, where we're going to sort of reduce the intensity of an area in our shot, and we can select it via a color. What we want to do is select this little dropper right here, and then we are going to come up to this area, this sort of like yellow greenish area in our shot. We want to click on it. We'll then see some adjustments in the hue saturation and luminance sliders. And then we want to come down here to this little checkbox. And now everything that is gray is currently not being selected. And everything that is its actual color, which is super close to gray anyway, is being selected. And what we can do with the hue, saturation, and luminance sliders is adjust our selection. So for example, if I wanted to increase how much of the area we selected that is saturated, and I want to sort of increase the selection of that area, I could start to increase the saturation. And that hasn't grown all that much, so maybe I come over to the hue slider, and now I start increasing the hue slider, and as you can see in the top right-hand corner especially, you can start to see more of that building coming into selection there. So we're going to broaden that up quite a lot. We can also feather things out quite nicely here as well. And then we can do the same thing with luminance just like that. And I sort of want to push it until we start selecting some of our subject. Okay, I'd say that's looking pretty good. What I'm now going to do is deselect this to make sure I can see everything again. And now we can move down into the adjustments we can make to the area that we just selected. But the first thing we want to do when we get down here is to just increase the blur. What this is going to do is help us sort of soften the edges of where we've selected. Especially when it comes to video, you want to try and avoid any really harsh lines when it comes to color grading, purely because when things start moving, as this is not a static image, we want to make sure that things don't look weird, they don't look sort of, fragmented or like you want to try and avoid harsh lines. So increasing the blur is just sort of going to add a little bit of padding around our selection. And now we can move into the correction and all the adjustments of that area with a little bit more confidence. So what we can do here is now look at maybe reducing the temperature. And as you can see, things get colder up the back, or if we wanted to increase the temperature, things get warmer. Now, I don't really want to make either of those adjustments. What I will do though is just back off the saturation quite intensely, as once again, we're trying to kill off these areas. We also might back off the sharpness quite a little bit as well, and then also maybe look at reducing the contrast just like that. This isn't a huge sort of monumental change to our shot whatsoever, and if we wanted to have a look at a before and after, it just sort of kills off and makes those areas look a little bit more dead in our shot, which is exactly what we're after. Now, that wraps up step number 2, which is all about coloring our shot. If we turn off all of the coloring tools, which are the tools I just turned off there, this is a before, and then this is an after. This shot hasn't needed too much of an intense coloring workflow. Thankfully, naturally, the colors in our shot are looking pretty nice, so I'm happy with how things are looking. Let's now move on to step number 3, which is going to be the final step in this video, which has everything to do with masking. Now, very similar to almost every single step that we've covered in this video, masking can either take 30 seconds, depending on how long you want it to be, or it can take an hour and a half, if not longer. Obviously, we're not going to be doing an hour and a half of masking today, but we are going to be adding maybe 1, 2, or maybe even 3 masks. I usually find myself getting quite carried away with masking to this shot just to show you exactly how it works. So what we first want to do is come up to Lumetri color here and then rename the first Lumetri color. And we're going to rename this to base grade. And I'll show you why that's super important in just a minute. We are then going to come down to add Lumetri color effect, and we're going to rename this one to mask 1, and we can call this vignette, which is exactly what we're going to add to this shot. We can then come down to the bottom left-hand corner, which is where we can pick up the, not the rectangle tool. We want to come down here to the masking tool, and we are going to add an ellipse mask. And then we're going to draw this over all of the shot just like that. You don't have to be too accurate to begin with because you can sort of resize it just like that. And then we're going to make this just a little bit tighter. You can zoom out just by pinching sort of out on your trackpad if you're using a trackpad, or scrolling out if you're using a mouse. And we sort of want to make sure that we're selecting all the corners of our shot. But you might be thinking to yourself, Zach, isn't everything in red getting selected? Well, yes, but we are now going to come back up to effect controls here in the top left-hand corner and hit invert. And now we're selecting the outside of this mask, which is everything around our subject, which is perfect. We're then going to come over to opacity and feather, and we're going to feather this mask like crazy because once again, we want to make sure that we don't have any harsh lines in our shot. And then we can also look at dropping the expansion of this mask, which just makes it a little bit tighter on our subject, which is perfect. Now, what we are going to do is we can close up motion just like that. We can close up our base grade Lumetri color. And now, as you can see here, we've got clearly marked base grade and mask 1 vignette. So now we can drag our mask into the mask 1 vignette, make our way over to the basic correction tab and make sure we have mask 1 vignette selected. I can then start to drop the exposure and shadows on this mask 1 vignette. And by the way, if you wanted to remove that overlay, that red overlay, all you've got to do is click on the timeline, click back on your clip, and then it will be gone. So now we can come over to exposure. We've got mask 1 vignette selected, and now we're going to look at dropping the exposure and also dropping the shadows, maybe also increasing the contrast as well. I might have pushed the exposure just a little bit. And just like that, we've now added a nice vignette to this shot. If we have a little look, we can reset the zoom here. If we have a little look at a before and after, this just helps our subject stand out so much more, which is great. And because it is locked to the outside of our frame, we don't need to do any tracking whatsoever. And that is mask number 1 wrapped up. Now let's add mask number 2. First thing we're going to do is add a Lumetri color effect. And they're going to come down here to rename, and we can call this mask 2. What do we want to do next? Let's have a look at the clip. Okay, mask 2, darken bottom. Enter. We can then come down here to, we can use the ellipse tool again. And what we're going to do this time is drag this over the whole bottom of our shot, just like that. And we're just going to have a little bit of the mask coming into the frame. We can increase the feather just like that. This time I don't think we'll need to decrease the expansion. And then we can assign ellipse mask 2 to Lumetri color mask 2 darken bottom, just like that. Hopefully, there we go. It's dropped on. And now let's remove that overlay. We can adjust our zoom. And now we're going to come here to exposure and just reduce this a little bit. We're going to reduce the shadows, increase the contrast as well. And this just helps direct the viewer's eye above the bottom of the shot, which is looking great. And then last but not least, even though we could go crazy on all of these masks, we're going to add another mask. We're going to rename this mask to mask 3 subject contrast. Great stuff. Now, there are a couple of ways to do this, and we might not be choosing the best way right now. Let's shorten up this clip a little bit just before he picks his thumb up, just to save a little bit of time. And now what we can do is come over to the masking tool again, but this time we're going to hit Object Mask Tool. We want to make sure that we're at the start of our clip. And then what we're going to do is come over to our subject and make sure that he goes all red, and then just click on our subject. And now you can see up here in the Effect Controls panel, we have Object Mask, which is great. Now, what we want to do is we want to click this button right here, which is Track Selected Mask Forward, which will allow Premiere Pro to track our mask for us, which is great to make sure that we don't have to go in and track every single little movement that our subject is making. And just like that, it has perfectly tracked it. And now what we can do is close up Mask 2, drag this into Mask 3, and now we get to make adjustments just to our subject. And the best part is it's perfectly tracked to him. This was something that we couldn't do even a year ago, so to be able to do this has been an absolute game changer. Now, as this Lumetri color is called Subject Contrast, we are going to come to the start of our clip, head down to the contrast slider, and just look at increasing the contrast. And as you can see, as we increase the contrast, we're not affecting any other parts of our shot. We're only affecting our subject. So we're just going to increase the contrast to about 20 there. We're going to reduce the shadows just a little bit, and we're also going to reduce the highlights a touch as well. Maybe I pushed the shadows just a little bit too much. And there we go. Just like that, our subject is now a little bit more contrasty. And the reason I shortened that clip was just to speed up the tracking. You can do this on longer clips, no worries at all. And there we go. That is step number 3 out of the way. But I want to show you one last little hidden tip or trick, whatever you like to call it, before we wrap up this video, which has everything to do, and I sort of alluded to this at the start of the video, with our Lumetri scopes. So we've got the waveform right here, but if we open up a vector scope and then we close waveform, you'll notice that we have a vector scope here and a whole load of information in the middle of our shot, which is great. However, we want to make sure that we have got the skin tones of our subject perfect. So to do that, what we're going to do is open up our masking tool again, and then we could select the rectangle mask tool, and we're going to zoom in on our subject just like that. And let's make a mask over the bright and dark areas of his skin, just like that. Come over to Effect Controls and then drag this rectangle mask into Opacity. There we go. Now all we can see is this guy's nose and some of his cheek. And now if we come over to allometry scopes, you will notice we have a whole load less information in our shot. We're only getting a reading for his skin tone. And what we want to do here is make sure that the small amount of information that we do have is over that harsh line between yellow and red, which is the ideal skin tone line. Thankfully, it is directly over that, which is great, which means we don't have to make any adjustments. But if we did need to make any adjustments, we would need to control the temperature, the tint, and/or in here, we could control the hue versus hue and also the hue versus saturation to sort of dial in his skin tone. And obviously, we would want to select the little dropper here, select his skin tone, and make the adjustments as we see fit. But thankfully, for this clip, we have absolutely nailed it, which is great. And then what we want to do is just come back to the effect controls, into rectangle and mask, delete that mask so we can see the rest of our clip. And our color grade is now done. Guys, that is going to wrap up today's video. I hope now you can dive into Premiere Pro and understand that to color grade any clip, you need to take 3 steps. You correct, you color, you mask, and then you're ready to export. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. If you want to speed up your entire color grading workflow, head down to the first link in the description where you can pick up my cinematic LUTs that are going to make color grading an absolute breeze, and it'll make your footage look super nice. Anyway, guys, if you're new around here, a subscribe would mean the absolute world. If you learned something in today's video, let me know what it was in the comments down below. And if you want to continue learning about video editing and color grading, you can check this video out right here, and I'll see you over there.